Chapter 788. Cordial invitation. Sonny took a quick shower and went downstairs. By the time he came down, Nephi's was just exiting the guest room. She changed from the gym shorts and a tank top that she had been wearing for their practice session and put on some of the clothes they had ordered for her a few days back. Her silver hair was wet, glistening in the rays of sunshine that poured through the windows. Without having to say anything, Sonny went to the kitchen, opened a drawer and took out a can of grounded coffee. Then he stretched his arm back. By then, Nephi's had already filled a pot with water and placed it into his hand. Soon, the pleasant aroma spread through the house. By the time the coffee was ready, a PTV was in the process of parking nearby. Sonny dumped 2 spoons of sugar into his cup, left the one intended for Neph without any, and added cream to the third. Changing Star, meanwhile, was opening the door for Cassie. Soon all 3 were seated around the table, enjoying their respective beverages. After a while, Sonny glanced at the blind girl and asked, "Well, what's the news?" She lingered for a bit, then pushed her cup away and produced 2 flat white squares. Sonny stared at them for a bit, confused. Then he blinked a couple of times. "Is that an envelope?" Indeed, that was what the white squares were. They seemed to be made out of paper, and each had a round piece of red wax attached to it. Sonny had only seen an actual paper envelope used in period dramas, so he was justifiably surprised to encounter one in real life. Taking one of the envelopes, he curiously studied it from different sides. How quaint! There was an image of a sword piercing an anvil etched into the red wax, so at least he did not have to wonder where the strange things had come from. Legacies. Amused, he furtively glanced at Nephi's to learn what one was supposed to do with a paper envelope, and then repeated her actions. Soon, a different piece of paper appeared in his hands. "Master Sunless, you are cordially invited. What is this?" Even more confused than before, he turned to Cassie and raised an eyebrow. She was supposed to bring them an update on the situation with the government and Clan Valor, not some weird messages. The blind girl smiled slightly. "Basically, this is a gesture of goodwill." She paused for a moment and then added in a bright tone, "It is an invitation. Clan Valor is holding an annual ball in about a month. We are all invited to attend, which is usually considered a great honor. Not every master receives the privilege to brush sides with the most powerful representatives of the great clans and actual saints." Sonny blinked a couple of times. Is holding balls some weird legacy ceremony? Wait, what kinds of ball are we talking about? Something like a football. Why do people hold it annually, and more importantly, why do we have to attend this ball-holding ritual? Nephi's silently covered her face with a hand and said, a hint of exasperation finding its way into her voice, "Sonny, a ball is a social gathering, usually accompanied by a dance. It is not a literal ball." He stared at her for a moment, then glanced at the piece of paper in his hand and coughed. "Oh, that makes more sense, I guess." Cassie listened to them speak with a strange expression, then tilted her head a little and said, "Of course, in our case, this invitation holds special meaning. It is a sign that Clan Valor is willing to be patient and wait for Nephi's to recover. It is also the indication that the final negotiation is going to take place during the ball, 1 month from now. This gives us time to prepare." This was a good piece of news, all things considered. Basically, it meant that now that the initial week was over, Changing Star had more time to get ready to face the representatives of Clan Valor. It also meant that the Great Clan was not going to do anything before that, giving her freedom to recuperate in peace. It was more or less an armistice. A bright smile appeared on Cassie's delicate face. But there is more. To show their sincerity, Clan Valor released the firekeepers they were holding hostage. Both are already back and resting in the Immortal Flame Manor. This This means that they are serious about building a good relationship with us, I think. Sonny let out a sigh. He was not really attached to the firekeepers. Still, they had gone through the Civil War in the Bright Castle and the siege of the Crimson Spire together. The fools also treated him as one of their own, for some reason. He had felt a bit guilty knowing that some of them were suffering because of the terrible mess in the Night Temple. Effie, Kai, and Aiko were going to be very happy to hear the news, too. However, it was not like clan valor to let go of leverage. Sonny glanced at Cassie and frowned. What are they scheming? The blind girl hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged. I am not entirely sure. However, I do have a suspicion. This sudden change must indicate that something important happened to shift the balance of power even more in favor of Clan Song. That is why Valor is willing to make concessions to ensure that Immortal Flame becomes their ally. Sonny suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. What could have happened to change the power dynamic between the two great clans so much? He took a sip of his coffee and then asked, "Well, so what now?" Cassie smiled. Now, we are free to do anything we want for a month. The government is going to insist that Nephi's makes at least one public appearance, but they won't be too forceful in their demands. So, we can do whatever. She turned to Changing Star and said, her voice full of warmth, "Neph, how do you feel about finally coming home? We can go to the manor right now. If you're ready." Nephi's looked in the window and remained silent for a while. Her face was distant and still. After a while, she lightly shook her head. "No, not yet." Cassie seemed to be surprised by that answer. "No, but why?" Changing Star sighed. "The Fire Keepers. That is what people call the awakened who follow you, right? They all look up to me, do they not?" The blind girl silently nodded. "Of course. They have been waiting for your return ever since escaping the Forgotten Shore. Even though the Dreamer Army was an alliance of convenience, the bonds that were forged between its members are real. Their bond to you is real, too." Sonny sipped his coffee with a strange expression. Neph, meanwhile, lingered for a moment and then said, "But they want more than just to welcome me back. They expect me to lead them like I did on the Forgotten Shore. Am I correct?" Cassie nodded once again. Neph looked away. "How can I lead them when I don't know where I am going? I need more time to figure things out before I face them." The blind girl remained silent for a while, then sighed. I understand, I think." Sonny, meanwhile, did not understand. Sure, on the surface, what Nephi said made perfect sense. She was not sure of what she was going to do, so she could not offer the remnants of the Dreamer Army guidance. She could not become their general again until she decided on the direction her soldiers had to follow. However, Sonny harbored doubts about the sincerity of this indecision. Nephi's had never been one to allow her hesitation to slow her down. More than that, she had spent 2 whole years alone in the dream realm. If he knew anything about her, he knew that she must have dedicated a considerable amount of that time to obsessively making plans of how to destroy her enemies once she returned. Of course, there was a lot of new information that became available to Neph after she came back. That had to change her approach a little, but should not have affected the core of it. So why was she hesitating? What was she struggling with? Sonny did not know and was not sure that he wanted to know yet. In any case, he was going to learn sooner or later. There was something else that bothered him, though. He glanced at Nephi's and Cassie and then said, his voice grumpy, "Aren't you two forgetting something? This is still my home. We only agreed that Nephi's would stay here for a week. Shouldn't you at least ask me before deciding to leave her here for a while longer?" He was not going to let Changing Star pull off an Effie that easily. Neph turned and looked at him with an unreadable expression. After a few moments of silence, she asked, "Sonny, do you mind if I stay for a couple more weeks?" He coughed and then glanced away in embarrassment. Of course, sure, no problem, glad to have you and all that. See, was that so hard? Cassie remained for a bit longer to get Nephi's up to speed about the state of the firekeepers and the renovations they were making to the Immortal Flame Manor, and then left. Running a prominent awakened organization was not an easy task, so she had a lot on her plate. Sonny and Neff were left alone again. He hesitated for a few moments and then asked, "Do you really not want to go home? I mean, I never really had one more or less before buying this house, but if I did, I imagine I would have missed it a lot." Nephi's glanced at him, then slowly shook her head. "That place is not really my home. We were moving a lot while I was growing up, sometimes because our financial situation changed, sometimes due to security issues. That manor is just the last in a long series of temporary shelters." She remained silent for a few moments, then added, "I guess it was the people who surrounded me that created the feeling of home, but they are all gone now, one way or the other, so there's nothing for me to return to." Sonny sighed, remembering the conversation he once had with Noctis. "I don't really understand what the Immortal Flame clan is, to be honest, and who those people were. You once said that you were raised by your grandmother." Changing Star nodded. "The Immortal Flame is just me now. At its height, it was one of the most influential legacy clans. You could have called it a great clan, even, although that distinction was not established yet back then. Apart from the immediate family, the clan also encompassed hundreds of other people. Professionals to manage our properties, craftsmen, mundane soldiers, awakened retainers, their dependents. A legacy clan is more than just a few powerful warriors. It is a large, self-sufficient institution. A tribe, even." She grew silent and then said, "Of course, our fortunes turned after Immortal Flame himself died and my mother became hollow. Then my father was gone, too. Only my grandmother remained to take care of me. She was not an awakened, however. Don't think that she was weak because of it. On the contrary, although my grandmother was a mundane human, she was also the strongest person I've ever known." Nephi's looked away, a hint of emotion appearing on her face. She was a member of the first generation. She was born during the darkest times of humanity, survived the bloody descent of the spell and the final convulsions of the old world order, then participated in the establishment of the new one. She was strong. She was also wise and kind. I couldn't wish for a better guardian. She looked down. However, she was not enough to keep the Immortal Flame clan from falling, especially not when we found ourselves in the crosshairs of my father's former companions. Slowly but surely, we lost our assets and our standing. Some of the people in our employ left of their own free will, others were forced to abandon us because of adversity. Many of those who remained died trying to protect me. The most loyal ones still persisted. There were several awakened among them and even a master, my mentor." Nephi sighed. "But in the end, he was gone too. By the time I turned 16, all that remained were a few mundane servants who had been with us for so long that they had nowhere else to go. After my grandmother passed away and I felt the call of the nightmare spell, I paid them a generous stipend from what little funds the clan had left and let them go. You know the rest." Changing Star remained silent for a while, and then added, "I remember walking through the manor before leaving it to comply with the third directive and surrender myself to the police. It was so strange, seeing it completely empty. My grandmother was gone. My mother was in the care facility. The servants had left. It was just me, alone." She looked away. Suddenly, a pale smile appeared on her face. "Nothing held me back, so I wasn't sad to leave at all. There was only one direction left for me, forward." Sonny looked at her silently, a somber expression hidden in the depths of his eyes. Only forward. That was true for the both of them still. However, was it worth it to not be held back by anything, if in return you had nothing to hold dear? Turning away, he sighed. Life was not that simple anymore, despite the fact that Nephi's had decided to stay with Sunny for a couple more weeks, or rather, that he had allowed her stay. Their routine somewhat changed. Because of the armistice with Clan Valor, she did not have to stay inside all the time anymore. So, while the two of them still continued having exhausting practice sessions every day, the intensity of the training diminished. On the first day after receiving the invitation to the ball, Nephi's had left to visit her mother. Soon after that, she made a strange request. The counselor assigned to Neph by the government had suggested that she should not isolate herself from mundane humans and instead seek out opportunities to participate in collective activities people usually enjoyed. So, she asked Sunny to help her figure out what it was that people did with their free time. Sunny was glad to help. The problem was, he had no idea himself. His life experience was richer than hers, but the knowledge of how people lived their lives in the outskirts did not exactly apply to their situation. After becoming a citizen and moving to a better part of the city, Sunny had spent all his time doing more productive things than relaxing. Who had time to relax? There were so many things he needed to achieve. As the result, they had to turn to other members of the cohort for advice. When they did, Effie enthusiastically volunteered to arrange an outing. Although Sunny had a bad premonition about her proposal, he found no polite reason to refuse the giddy huntress. So a few days later, he found himself doing something that he had never thought he would ever do. Sunny was getting ready to go to a dance club. What am I even doing? This is so stupid. Standing in front of the mirror, he somberly looked at the pale young man that stared back at him. The young man was dressed in stylishly understated clothes that mixed black with different shades of dark gray. He was undeniably attractive, although not exactly masculine in appearance. The attractive young man, of course, was him. Or his reflection, rather. Sunny studied it and frowned. Whatever, it's just a nightclub. I have fought saints and survived. I have conquered the Red Colosseum. I have faced a demon. How scary can a bunch of drunk mundanes be? Shaking his head, he let out a heavy sigh and went down to the living room. As he sat and waited with a dark expression on his face, an expensive PTV arrived and parked near the house. At that moment, Effie and Neff emerged from one of the smaller bedrooms on the second floor and started descending the stairs. Finally, what took you so? He turned and froze, unable to finish his thought. Standing on the polished steps, Neff looked different. Although she was famous across the world, most people only knew her by name. Very few had actually seen the renowned changing star of the Immortal Flame clan, mostly because she had yet to appear in public after her return from the Dream Realm. However, it was still prudent to mask some of her more recognizable features to avoid being mobbed by an excited crowd. For that reason, Sunny had lent her the autumn leaf. Using the cosmetic memory, Nephi's changed the color of her distinct silver hair. Now her hair was black and lustrous, falling to the middle of her back like a waterfall of finest silk. Contrasted against it, her calm gray eyes seemed even more striking. Her ivory skin seemed to glow despite the fact that she was not channeling the radiant white flames. What was more, Effie had been the one who chose and bought the clothes for the two of them to wear today. As the result, Nephi's was wearing a vibrant red dress that barely reached the middle of her thigh and left her shoulders bare. She looked stunning. Sunny gulped, then forced himself to look away. A few moments later, he finally was able to say something. Never thought I'd see you in a dress, one day. Nephi's glanced at herself, then shrugged with indifference. I like it. The style does not diminish my range of motion. I can move freely if something happens. Sunny hesitated and then glanced at Effie, who was wearing less flashy clothes, with suspicion. How come you get to wear pants? Effie grinned. Why else? That's because I'm not a princess doofus. She giggled and then did a spin. What, you think that my ensemble is flattering? It was, maybe even too much so. Not knowing where to put his eyes, Sonny gritted his teeth and forced himself to stare at the wall. This is going to be a long night. He cleared his throat and then said, Yes, you look nice too. Anyway, we should go. Our ride is already here. Effie giggled again, patted him on the shoulder and headed for the door. Sonny and Nephi's followed. Soon, they entered the PTV and greeted the others. After seeing Kai, Sonny's mood improved a bit. At least the former idol seemed to be in his element. Cassie, on the other hand, seemed uneasy. Well, no wonder. A club filled with thundering music was not the best environment for a beautiful, blind girl to be in. Of course, anyone who got the wrong idea was bound to learn that they made a giant mistake by approaching her with ill intent. Kai smiled at him from the driver's seat. Sonny, you look great. Then he turned to Nephi's and Effie and smiled even wider, almost blinding them with his dazzling grin. But not as great as the ladies do, of course. Sonny rolled his eyes. Just drive, all right. Let's get this finished with as soon as possible. Kai winked at him, then looked at the road and sent the PTV forward. Relax, Sonny, it's just a dance club. What's the worst that could happen? Sonny and the gloomy shadow simultaneously shuddered. Are you kidding me? Did you have to say that out loud? Despite the fact that Nephi's had decided to stay with Sonny for a couple more weeks, or rather that he had allowed her stay, their routine somewhat changed. Because of the armistice with Clan Valor, she did not have to stay inside all the time anymore. So, while the two of them still continued having exhausting practice sessions every day, the intensity of the training diminished. On the first day after receiving the invitation to the ball, Nephi's had left to visit her mother. Soon after that, she made a strange request. The counselor assigned to Neph by the government had suggested that she should not isolate herself from mundane humans and instead seek out opportunities to participate in collective activities people usually enjoyed. So, she asked Sonny to help her figure out what it was that people did with their free time. Sonny was glad to help. The problem was, he had no idea himself. His life experience was richer than hers, but the knowledge of how people lived their lives in the outskirts did not exactly apply to their situation. After becoming a citizen and moving to a better part of the city, Sonny had spent all his time doing more productive things than relaxing. Who had time to relax? There were so many things he needed to achieve. As the result, they had to turn to other members of the cohort for advice. When they did, Effie enthusiastically volunteered to arrange an outing. Although Sonny had a bad premonition about her proposal, he found no polite reason to refuse the giddy huntress. So a few days later, he found himself doing something that he had never thought he would ever do. Sonny was getting ready to go to a dance club. What am I even doing? This is so stupid. Standing in front of the mirror, he somberly looked at the pale young man that stared back at him. The young man was dressed in stylishly understated clothes that mixed black with different shades of dark gray. He was undeniably attractive, although not exactly masculine in appearance. The attractive young man, of course, was him. Or his reflection, rather. Sonny studied it and frowned. Whatever, it's just a nightclub. I have fought saints and survived. I have conquered the Red Colosseum. I have faced a demon. How scary can a bunch of drunk mundanes be? Shaking his head, he let out a heavy sigh and went down to the living room. As he sat and waited with a dark expression on his face, an expensive PTV arrived and parked near the house. At that moment, Effie and Neph emerged from one of the smaller bedrooms on the second floor and started descending the stairs. Finally, what took you so? He turned and froze, unable to finish his thought. Standing on the polished steps, Neph looked different. Although she was famous across the world, most people only knew her by name. Very few had actually seen the renowned changing star of the immortal Flame clan, mostly because she had yet to appear in public after her return from the dream realm. However, it was still prudent to mask some of her more recognizable features to avoid being mobbed by an excited crowd. For that reason, Sunny had lent her the autumn leaf. Using the cosmetic memory, Nephi's changed the color of her distinct silver hair. Now her hair was black and lustrous, falling to the middle of her back like a waterfall of finest silk. Contrasted against it, her calm gray eyes seemed even more striking. Her ivory skin seemed to glow despite the fact that she was not channeling the radiant white flames. What was more, Effie had been the one who chose and bought the clothes for the two of them to wear today. As the result, Nephi's was wearing a vibrant red dress that barely reached the middle of her thigh and left her shoulders bare. She looked stunning. Sunny gulped, then forced himself to look away. A few moments later, he finally was able to say something. "That never thought I'd see you in a dress, one day." Nephi's glanced at herself, then shrugged with indifference. "I like it. The style does not diminish my range of motion. I can move freely if something happens." Sunny hesitated and then glanced at Effie, who was wearing less flashy clothes, with suspicion. "How come you get to wear pants?" Effie grinned. "Why else? That's because I'm not a princess doofus." She giggled and then did a spin. "What, you don't you think that my ensemble is flattering?" It was, maybe even too much so. Not knowing where to put his eyes, Sunny gritted his teeth and forced himself to stare at the wall. "This is going to be a long night." He cleared his throat and then said, "Yes, you look nice too. Anyway, we should go. Our ride is already here." Effie giggled again, patted him on the shoulder and headed for the door. Sunny and Nephi's followed. Soon they entered the PTV and greeted the others. After seeing Kai, Sunny's mood improved a bit. At least the former idol seemed to be in his element. Cassie, on the other hand, seemed uneasy. Well, no wonder. A club filled with thundering music was not the best environment for a beautiful, blind girl to be in. Of course, anyone who got the wrong idea was bound to learn that they made a giant mistake by approaching her with ill intent. Kai smiled at him from the driver's seat. "Sunny, you look great." Then he turned to Nephi's and Effie and smiled even wider, almost blinding them with his dazzling grin. "But not as great as the ladies do, of course." Sunny rolled his eyes. "Just drive, all right. Let's get this finished with as soon as possible." Kai winked at him, then looked at the road and sent the PTV forward. "Relax, Sunny, it's just a dance club. What's the worst that could happen?" Sunny and the gloomy shadow simultaneously shuddered. "Are you kidding me? Did you have to say that out loud?" Effie smiled, then gestured at the dancing crowd and added, "After they return from the dream realm, most awakened spend at least a part of their day training to raise their usefulness to the Citadel and increase their chances of survival. Some have important jobs to perform in the waking world, as well. Our infrastructure runs on spell tech, after all." She shook her head. "But other than that, there's plenty of time to live and have fun. It doesn't have to be all work, without stop. Some might even say that not having any other interests is detrimental." The huntress looked at them and shrugged. "I mean, how can you be motivated to fight for this world if you never experience all the nice things that it has to offer? Maybe that is why your counselor told you to participate in mundane human activities. Neph. Awakened and especially masters like us need to anchor ourselves to humanity somehow. But there's no gateways here." Sunny took a sniff of the strange, sparkling liquid in his glass, then carefully tasted it. This champagne, or whatever it was called, was way too expensive for him to pass the chance of getting his money's worth out of it. Well, he wasn't paying today, but still. It was a matter of principle. Of course, Sunny had sworn off alcohol, but with him being a master now, there was no way for him to get drunk unless he wanted to. Not because of mundane drinks like this one, anyway. Unless he consciously willed otherwise, his body was going to treat alcohol as a weak poison and resist it. Tastes sweet, but also bitter, very refreshing though, how strange. Effie's words made him thoughtful. She was not entirely wrong. Sonny himself felt a bit ambivalent about the waking world, which had not been kind to him in the past. He only liked it better than the dream realm because it was safer and had nice things, like delicious food, comfortable furniture, and network dramas. Also, Rain was here. But what if an awakened was indifferent to all those things? Would they even feel compelled to do anything to protect the waking world? What was going to stop them from abandoning the mundane completely after they became a master or a saint? Or a sovereign? Nephis, meanwhile, continued to study the dance hall. After a while, she said, "There might be many awakened here, but how prepared are they to fight against a flood of nightmare creatures? It takes a lot of courage to face an opening gate. Out of those who are courageous, how many are competent enough to make a difference? Not everyone is like Mongrel. Very few can stand their ground and fight." Effie gave her a strange look. "Huh, have you been watching a lot of videos on the network, Princess? You are quoting Mongrel now." Changing Star shrugged. "I just find him admirable." The huntress suddenly grinned and said in a conspiratorial tone, "Neff, do you maybe have a crush on Lord Mongrel?" Sonny almost spat out his champagne. He turned slightly and threw a murderous glance at Effie. Nephis, however, remained nonchalant. She showed no reaction and simply said, "I just appreciate his skill and his integrity. At first, I was merely attracted by how beautiful his swordsmanship is. Flowing, unpredictable, supremely adaptable. I watched a few of his duels as well as his performances in the Dream Tournament. His dedication, versatility, and domineering attitude left a deep impression on me." Changing Star shook her head. "But those were just games. It was only when I stumbled on a clip of Mongrel single-handedly stalling several waves of nightmare creatures in front of a gate that I truly grew to appreciate his character. In my opinion, he is what a true awakened should strive to be. Someone who is not resigned to bowing down to the spell and is determined to resist it instead. His will, mastery of combat, and wisdom are commendable. It warms my heart to know that there are warriors like him out there." Sonny gripped his glass and forced out an awkward smile. "Hey, let's not go overboard about that Mongrel guy, shall we? He's not that great. I mean, he was not really alone at that gate. There were other awakened helping him. As for all that wisdom stuff, I am willing to bet that he did not mean any of the crap he said." Nephis looked at him with surprise. "I disagree. I think that Mongrel deserves all the praise. He is truly remarkable." Effie, meanwhile, was looking at them with a grin. Sonny suddenly got a bad feeling. Before he could say something, however, the huntress leaned forward and whispered into Neff's ear, "You do know that Sonny is Mongrel, right?" Sonny choked on his champagne. The exquisite glass cracked slightly in his hand. Nephis froze. Her face remained still as ever. However, despite the dim lighting of the nightclub, he could swear there was a hint of pink slowly appearing on her cheeks. Was she blushing? "Damned Effie, I'll kill her." Changing Star remained silent for a while, then said in her usual even tone, "Of course, I definitely knew that." She straightened her back and then added, "I was just commenting on his perceived accomplishments. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to visit the restroom." She glanced at Sonny and Effie with a deadpan expression, then turned around and walked away. Her pace was calm and steady, not rushed at all. Effie waited for a few moments, then threw her head back and exploded in laughter. "Oh gods, doesn't make any sense. So inefficient, I can't with these two." Sonny glared at her with murder in his eyes. He remained silent for a few moments, then said softly, "Hey, Effie." She looked at him with a wide grin. "What doofus?" He sighed, then rotated his shoulders a few times. Do you have a will? The huntress blinked a couple of times. Sure, I made one before the second nightmare. Why? Sonny looked at her and smiled politely. Oh, no reason. No reason at all. Effie wisely chose that moment to disappear and join the dancing crowd below. Sonny ground his teeth for a few moments, then shook his head and walked to the table, landing on a luxurious lounge chair with a sigh. Kai briefly glanced at him and smiled. Where are Effie and Lady Nephi's? Sonny stared at him for a few moments, then looked away. Effie went to dance. Neff is in the bathroom. Also, will you cut it out with the lady stuff? The two of you spent months traversing the forgotten shore together, back when we were returning from the Hollow Mountains. She is also younger than you. That is more than enough to drop the formalities, don't you think? The archer coughed. Oh well, I'll try. He didn't sound very convincing, forcing Sonny to roll his eyes. Anyway, what do we have here? At some point, a waiter had entered the lounge and placed a tray of various foods on the table, while trying very hard not to throw reverent looks at the distinguished guests. Knowing that there would be no chance for him to taste anything once Effie returned, Sonny used the opportunity to try a few. As he chewed on a piece of cheese that had been dipped into a sweet, viscous amber liquid, Sonny smiled in delight and asked, Wow, what's that sugary syrup? Cassie turned to him, then smelled the air. I think it's honey. Sonny blinked a couple of times. The word was familiar, but he usually heard it used as a term of endearment. Who knew that it had actually come from something this delicious? What is honey, though? The blind girl tilted her head a little, then said with a bit of surprise in her voice. Well, it is. A sort of liquid that special insects produce by ingesting and regurgitating floral nectar, I guess. Sonny froze, grew a little pale, and slowly pushed the cheese plate away from himself. I see, good to know. With that, he gulped a mouthful of champagne and tried to discreetly rinse his mouth. Sonny was never picky about his food. He had even sustained himself on raw, rotting mimic meat for an entire month once. But even he had his limits. Damned rich people, what are they going to come up with next? Soon Nephi's returned. She was acting as if nothing had happened and her face was perfectly composed. However, there was a hint of confusion in her eyes. As she sat down, Kai hesitated for a moment and then said, You seem concerned. Did anything happen on Nephi's? Changing Star paid no attention to the lack of lady and simply shook her head. Nothing. I just overheard a bit of a strange conversation on my way back. Apparently, there is a little snack here in the VIP lounge that those women would want to taste. Odd. Why wouldn't they just order it themselves? Well, maybe it is not on the common menu. Sonny glanced at the small bowl of honey with disgust and sneered. If they want it, they can have it. I have no objections. They are free to gobble it up as far as I'm concerned. Ignoring a strange glance from Kai, Sonny took a sip of champagne and relaxed a little. That was the point of today's outing anyway. After days of serving as a punching bag for an untrained master, he deserved some rest. Soon enough, Effie returned. The huntress was practically beaming with delight. She quickly destroyed most of their food, poured herself a drink, and grinned. This is fun. We should go out more often. Sonny and Nephi's looked at her in horror, while Kai nodded. Indeed, it's just a shame that they don't have live music. Effie, meanwhile, looked around with a bit of curious expression. This is strange, though. I never imagined living like this. I mean, my goal was always to become a master, but now that I did, everything seems a little surreal. The archer smiled wistfully. Yes, life is full of surprises, isn't it? Before the Forgotten Shore, I had a clear picture of what my future would look like. Then, for years, I tried not to think about the future at all. And now that I reached that future, it's not like what I thought it would be. Not even a little bit. Cassie let out a small sigh. Me too. When I look back on my younger self and think about what she expected from the future, I can't believe how naive and short-sighted she was. She feels like a stranger. A few gazes fell on Sonny. He raised his eyebrow and then said, "What? This is exactly how I imagined my life would go, actually. After I returned from the first nightmare, I thought that I would soon be a full citizen, super rich, and have unlimited access to tasty food. So I don't know what you're talking about. For me, everything went according to plan." Effie rolled her eyes and then glanced at Nephi's. "What about you, princess?" Changing Star lingered for a moment, then shrugged. "I am exactly where I expected to be, too. Of course, the details are different, but the result is the same. Legacies don't really have a choice in these matters." Sonny suddenly became curious. "I heard that all children of legacy clans are inevitably infected by the nightmare spell. There is just no chance for them to remain mundane. Is this true? If so, why? What is so special about your kind?" Nephi's took a sip of champagne, thought for a moment, and then said calmly, "There is nothing special about legacies, as far as one's chances of becoming infected go. We are not inherently predisposed to awaken, unlike what many people believe. There are just certain measures that a clan can undertake to make sure that its heirs do." Sonny blinked a couple of times. "Like what?" Neff looked at him evenly. "It is simple, really. The parents of a legacy child just have to implore for assistance from a saint. That is why lesser clans always seek to ally themselves with more powerful ones. The child is brought to the dream realm and then returned to the clan. This way, the seed is already planted in their soul. Once they come of age, it is inevitable for the seed to bloom and bring them to the first nightmare." Sonny frowned, feeling something strange about her phrasing. "Seed, as in the seed of nightmare." Changing Star calmly nodded. "Of course, the first nightmare is not different from all the rest. It is also born from a seed. It is just that this seed does not grow in the dream realm. Instead, it grows in a human soul. Have you never thought why there are no gates of the first category?" "Well, there are, of course. Every aspirant that fails their first nightmare becomes a miniature gate, allowing a single nightmare creature to enter the waking world. That is why their corpses turn into monsters." The sudden revelation brought the mood down for a few minutes. Sonny silently drank his champagne, thinking about what Neff had just said. It made a lot of sense, in a dark and disturbing way. It also shed some light on how the spell chose its victims. He doubted that a seed of nightmare, no matter how small, could bloom in just any soul. It probably required fertile soil to take root, of course. In this ravaged world, there were plenty of broken and traumatized people whose souls could nurture a nightmare seed. It had been even more so 50 years ago, when the spell first appeared. Had the collective anguish and torment of those lucky few who had survived the dark times summoned it from whatever hell the spell existed in, ushering the rise of the first generation of the awakened and everything that followed? He did not know, and doubted that he would find out any time soon, if ever. Nevertheless, there was another interesting hint in what Nephi's had explained to them. If legacies wanted their children to inherit the mantle, and only saints could ensure that the poor kids would be doomed to either awaken or die, then saints held even more power among the legacy clans than he had thought. And who were the first saints of humanity? Asterion, Kai Song, Anvil of Veil, and Broken Sword. They were the first, and at some point the only people who all legacy clans had to befriend if they wanted to ensure that their bloodlines continued walking on the path of ascension. Was that, perhaps, the initial reason that had elevated the great clans above all the rest? Interesting. He was not in the mood to ponder the origins of power that the sovereigns held, however. Thinking about the great clans made him feel sour. Since today was Sonny's day off, he chased the weary thoughts away and tried to enjoy his drink instead. Cassie, meanwhile, said with a deep frown, Isn't it too cruel to subject your children to such fate, and without even giving them a choice? Only 1 out of 3 aspirants survives the first nightmare. Of course, that strongly depends on how well prepared they are, so the number should be less gruesome among the legacies. But still, what kind of parent would do something like that to their child? Nephis lingered for a while, then sighed. It all depends on your point of view. Sure, it might seem cruel to some, but some might see it as giving their child a chance to grow strong in a world that is not kind to the powerless. Legacies are a warrior caste at their core. They were born from a ruthless war, one that almost destroyed all of humanity. I can understand why they value strength and duty above all else. All that talk about parents and children brought Sonny into a dark mood. He was 20 now. He was more or less an adult. In fact, he was already older than his mother had been when she had him. This realization made him feel very strange. Sonny stared into his glass for a few minutes with a grim expression, then sighed and stood up. "I'll be back in a few." With that, he left his friends and went away in search of a bathroom. In truth, he just wanted to be alone for a bit. Soon, he was staring at his reflection as the water was running from an exquisite brass faucet. The young man staring at him from the mirror did not seem amused. Sonny frowned, thinking about whether Mordred was hiding somewhere in the mirror. It had become a habit of his to consider such things from time to time. Luckily, this time, the Prince of Nothing seemed to be nowhere to be found. Sonny sighed in relief and then left the bathroom to return to the VIP lounge. On his way, however, he encountered a small disturbance. A group of young men and women were blocking his way, discussing something with one of the club's employees in loud voices. Their clothes looked extremely expensive, and their appearance was impeccably high class. As he came closer, he heard the most extravagant-looking member of the group saying with outrage, "What do you mean, you can't let us inside? This is our usual spot. I can see from here that there's plenty of room left in the lounge. The beautiful ladies inside wouldn't mind some company, I'm sure. Actually, I am willing to bet that my friend and I can show them far greater time than their present companion." The hostess looked at him and said in an awkward tone, "Sir, I am very sorry, but the whole VIP lounge was reserved by the esteemed guests." The young man scoffed. "Esteemed guests? Do you even know who I am? I sincerely doubt that anyone in this ramshackle parlor of yours has more esteem than I." Sonny sighed, approached the group of young people, and patted the loudmouth on the shoulder. The young men looked down in confusion, then frowned. "I suggest you unhand me, friend. What do you want?" Sonny smiled. "Relax, buddy. I just want to give you a small piece of advice." He hugged the young man with one arm, turned him to face the VIP lounge, and pointed at Nephis, Cassie, Effie, and Kai, who could barely be seen from that spot. "Do you see these people? Do you know who they are?" The loudmouth scowled, then thought for a moment and asked with curiosity, "Oh, you know these beauties. Who are they?" Sonny's grin grew wider. "Well, let me tell you. They are all experienced murderers and killers. I once saw the tall one tear a fallen beast apart, devour its meat, and gnaw on its bones. The pretty guy next to her used to be nice, but after being burned alive and having his skin replaced with primitive grafts by an unlicensed medical practitioner, he developed some strange ideas. That delicate blonde girl is actually the most terrifying. There are 50 powerful awakened that follow her around like lost puppies and eat from the palm of her hand, all willing to obey her commands. Every one of them is a maniac. That stunning, incredible beauty next to her, boy, I don't even know where to start. She was contemplating killing everyone in this club just half an hour ago. Luckily, we managed to distract her." With each word, the young man grew paler and paler. His friends were suddenly silent, too. When Sonny was done speaking, the loudmouth nervously looked at the pale hand that was resting on his shoulder and asked in a small voice, and who might you be?" Sunny smiled brilliantly. Me? Oh, I live with two of these girls. I have a nice house, with very special facilities of the underground kind, if you know what I mean. The third, I had to spend almost a month locked in a cage with that one. Gods, that was rough. As for the skin graft guy, he drives me around. The young man turned slightly green, then gently moved Sunny's hand off his shoulder and backed away. IISC. Thank you very much for the advice, FR, sir. On second thought, we should be going. My, oh my, look at the time. His group suddenly disappeared, as if they had never been there in the first place. Sunny looked at the hostess and shrugged. Well, whatever. By the way, we're out of snacks. Could you bring us some more? Just no honey, please. To Sunny's absolute shock, nothing really happened for the rest of the night. There was no deadly brawl that forced the cohort to intervene. No emissary of the great clans arrived to crash the party. No gate opened right in front of the club. He had been fully prepared for something to go terribly wrong, but in the end, nothing did. How odd. The five masters simply had a good time listening to loud music, being served delicious drinks and food, and enjoying each other's company. Sunny did not know if this outing was helping Nephi's in a way that she had hoped it would, but he found it unexpectedly relaxing. Spending quality time with good friends was what normal humans were supposed to enjoy, after all. However, he had never had such an opportunity as a mundane. Sunny had never really fit into any of the groups he had tried to become a part of in the outskirts. He had always existed on their periphery before being expelled from them, as if something about him caused a subconscious rejection. He did not really know what had changed. Maybe it was the people he was with, or maybe it was the circumstances that had brought them together. Most likely, it was Sunny himself that had become different. In any case, for the first time in his life, he felt safe and secure about his place. He felt as if he truly belonged with these people. That did not mean that they were connected at the hip, of course. In fact, the members of the cohort had plenty of differences and underlying conflicts that had the potential to push them away from each other. Even the phrase itself was not exactly accurate. At this point, they were not really members of a distinct cohort anymore. Even if all five chose to pursue the same goal together, which was rather improbable, masters rarely operated in groups. They were too rare and powerful for such an arrangement. Most ascended acted independently, only gathering together to face especially terrible threats. But that was all right. This was how mature relationships were supposed to work. Sunny and his friends did not have to spend every waking minute together to preserve their bond. It was deep and tempered enough to remain strong even if each of them walked their separate path from now on. Still, the prospect of separation made Sunny feel wistful. He would have preferred for the five of them to stay together, at least in some capacity. However, the future was too obscure. Until the fateful ball, it was hard to say in which direction their lives would go. That was why this rare moment was so precious. Throwing all serious thoughts out of his mind, Sunny relaxed and tried to enjoy it as much as he could. Who knew when they would have a chance to spend such a peaceful evening together again, if ever? Steel was once again striking against steel in the underground dojo. Well, alloy was striking against alloy, to be more precise. For once, Sunny was not suffering on the receiving end of Changing Star's assault. The slender young woman was actually sitting on top of his inactive sleeping pod with her eyes closed, meditating as she controlled the soul essence rushing through her body. Instead, Sunny was defending himself against earnest, but amateurish attacks delivered by Rain. What a nice change of pace. The teenage girl was trying her best to get through his defense, but even when Sunny drastically toned down his speed and strength, her efforts were simply not enough. Despite her hard work, outstanding talent, and the swift improvement she had made, Rain was like an open book for him. Of course, he couldn't expect much from a mundane teenager. Still, her performance today was far from stellar. Sunny frowned. Concentrate, you are distracted. Rain gritted her teeth and tried, but her mind was obviously elsewhere. A few minutes later, he was forced to command her to stop and stared at his pupil with dissatisfaction. "Are you going to take it seriously or not? What is wrong with you today?" Sonny knew that he had lucked out with his student. Unlike most teenagers, Rain had never given him any trouble with regard to her diligence and motivation. It was only natural for her to try and slack off eventually, but he had already gotten used to his sister giving it her all during their lessons. Now, nothing short of excellence would do. Rain breathed heavily, then threw a furtive glance at the alcove containing the sleeping pod and the dreamscape pod. Her cheeks turned slightly red. "Sorry, I can't. Lady Changing Star is here." Sonny scowled. "What about her?" The teenage girl looked at him with embarrassment, and then said in a small voice, "You don't get it, she's watching." Sonny blinked a couple of times, and then stared at her in confusion. "Her eyes are closed, and anyway, you can't fight properly because someone is watching. Are you kidding me? Do you think that battles happen in private or something?" Rain shook her head. "It's not just someone. It's the Changing Star. She is, famous." Sonny scratched the back of his head. "I am famous too, but look at Nephi's. She is somewhat of my #1 fan, as it turns out, yet she is practicing diligently without letting anything distract her. She is not starstruck at all." The teenage girl shook her head again. "It's different. I know that you are a big deal. I'm also used to seeing Effie and Lady Kasha, even night. But Lady Nephi's is on a whole other level. She's not just a celebrity, she actually matters. She is one of the mostest people." Sonny glared at his little sister. "Actually matters, ouch." He sighed, then lowered his alloy stick and summoned the endless spring. "I guess we're going to have a different kind of lesson today." Sonny put a hand on Rain's shoulder and pointed at Nephi's. "You're a smart kid, Rain. Your father works for the government. You should be able to separate truth from propaganda. Sure, Neph is an extraordinary individual, and she achieved a lot of incredible things. But she is just a human. All that stuff that is clouding your head is just an illusion that other humans created to shove an uplifting narrative down the population's throat. You can't be that gullible and believe in things that aren't real." The teenage girl remained silent for a bit, then frowned. "But these things are real. Whether they are true or not, people believe in them, so they're real." Sonny tilted his head a little. "What do you mean?" Rain glanced at him and shrugged. "It is because my father works for the government that I know this stuff. Well, let's say that millions of people believe that Lady Nephi's is the hero that is going to lead humanity to conquer the fourth nightmare. It doesn't matter if she truly is. As long as people believe it, she has influence over them. Her image might be an illusion, but that influence is real. Which means that her power is also real. Do you understand?" He stared at her in bewilderment. "So, you are saying that just because someone decided to make Neph into a powerful hero and manipulated people into believing that she actually became one?" Rain nodded. "Think about it. If Lady Nephi's decides to appear in public tomorrow and appeal for people to take arms and join the government army, tens of thousands of new recruits will answer the call. Maybe even hundreds of thousands. How can something that can affect hundreds of thousands of lives not be real? So, she is different from a celebrity like Knight or a master like you. She is the real deal." Sonny scratched the back of his head. "Why am I getting schooled by my student? About lies and deceit of all things?" The worst part of it was that Rain made a lot of sense. Power was an elusive concept, so was the difference between the real and the unreal. It was easy to point at an object and say that it was real. One could see it, touch it, and break it. But what about less tangible things? Was friendship real? Or love, or belief, for example? If belief in something could affect millions of people, cause them to throw themselves into a war, persecute a group of individuals, or build incredible miracles of architecture. It was indeed stupid to say that the thing they believed in was not real. Since it was able to exert influence on the real world, the object of their belief stopped being an illusion and became something different. Something like a deity. Sonny frowned. What the hell am I thinking about? I was supposed to discipline my lazy student, not go on a philosophical tangent about the nature of divinity. It did not apply to actual gods anyway. When they had been alive, the gods did not care about who believed in them and why. Why would they, if their power had been born long before humanity even existed? At that point, Nephis suddenly turned her head and said without opening her eyes, "You talk too much. Keep swinging that sword, Rain." The teenage girl flinched and obediently raised her weapon. "Yes, Lady Nephis." Sonny opened his mouth. "Wait, who's the teacher here?" Neph, meanwhile, lingered for a moment and added, "The power you talk about might be real, but it is fragile and insubstantial. It can be broken just as easily as it was created, unless the person wielding it has actual strength to defend it. At the end of the day, nothing that has been handed to you is as valuable as what you have nurtured and cultivated yourself. So, don't slack off in your training." Her expression softened a little, and the corner of her mouth curved upward. "You are doing very well already. Just continue practicing with the same determination." A bright smile suddenly appeared on Rain's face. "Really? You really think so?" Sonny said so too. He said that I am way better than he was. Nephis slowly shook her head. Sonny did not have a systematic education and the solid foundation that you enjoy. He never had a proper teacher, let alone a personal tutor. And yet, he has achieved so much in such a short time. You are far from his level for now. Even if you catch up to his corresponding accomplishments, it won't be enough. With your background and advantages, the only acceptable result is to surpass them." Sonny scoffed. "Yeah, no way that happens." Rain threw an angry look at him, and then said defensively, "But I am not even a sleeper. I don't have a soul core and an aspect. I can't do what he did." Neph opened her eyes and looked at the teenage girl somberly. "It doesn't matter if you are an awakened, a sleeper, or a mundane human. Chances are you won't even be infected by the spell. That doesn't mean that you have an excuse to remain weak. In fact, that only makes your need to grow stronger more dire." She sighed. "Most people in this world are mundane, and yet they face the same dangers. I've known many brave individuals who did not possess supernatural strength or a powerful aspect. It takes a lot of courage to resist the tyranny of the spell without them. Those people might have not wielded weapons or fought on the front lines of this war, but they were more courageous than most awakened I've seen. And the impact they made was no less real." Nephis closed her eyes again and resumed cycling her essence. "Strength is strength. Whether you become an awakened or not, you'll need it, so train earnestly. Don't let my presence distract you." Sonny felt like he urgently needed to say something. He cleared his throat and looked at Rain solemnly. Yeah, this world is not kind to the weak. Well, you know this. Wasn't that the reason you asked me to train you in the first place? So stop staring at Neph and get to work." The teenage girl hesitated for a few moments and then bowed. "Thank you, Grand Teacher." Sonny ground his teeth. "What? Why don't I get a thank you? What the hell?" The alloy stick in his hand came to life, shooting forward to strike Rain on the shoulder. However, the girl had not let down her guard. Reacting with surprising speed, she sidestepped his attack and deflected the stick with her training sword, then counterattacked. Sonny almost got hit in the nose. He hid his surprise and continued pressuring his student. Well, whatever just happened appears to have worked. Rain did not seem distracted anymore, at least. On a cold winter morning, two people were making their way through the black slush that drowned a rundown street, piling high near the dirty walls of the cheap panel buildings that clung to each other, as if for warmth. The loud sound of their steps echoed in the dim twilight, making it seem as if a monster was chewing on rotten flesh. Nephis glanced at the dirt covering her expensive boots, then smelled the air and grimaced. Adjusting the collar of her white coat, she then glanced at Sonny and asked, "Why are we here exactly?" He shoved his hands into his pockets and shrugged. "Weren't you told to submerge yourself into how mundane humans live? Well, here we are. This is life, too." He gestured at the ugly landscape that surrounded them and sighed. After several years, Sonny was back in the outskirts. Brings back memories. In the aftermath of the collapse of old humanity, ravages of war and natural cataclysms made most of the planet uninhabitable. To exist in relative safety, people had to congregate in large cities like the one he had grown up in, the Northern Quadrant siege capital. Everywhere else was either drowned underwater or looked like a desert. Of course, life persisted. Some trees and plants were still clinging to life. Large mammals mostly went extinct, but a few species of animals and insects had managed to adapt. However, the damage to most ecosystems was too severe. The earth turned barren, the water turned poisonous, and even the air itself was not safe to breathe anymore. Luckily, humans had technology to help them survive. The city incorporated sophisticated water filtration systems, food distribution infrastructure, and other means of keeping the population alive. It was surrounded by tall barrier walls that prevented excessive microdust, various toxins, stray remnants of weaponized bacteria, harmful radiation, and other hazards from getting into the air supply. Sonny did not know much about how the barriers worked, but they were sufficiently effective in keeping the city in a bubble of breathable air. Of course, each district also possessed its own additional means of purifying the air even further. The problem, however, was that the barriers were stationary while the city was not. The human population across the planet had dropped, but here in NQSC it was slowly growing. As a result, the city grew too. It stretched further and further both into the sky and underground. Of course, it also sprawled horizontally. Eventually, the city had outgrown the circle of barriers. Hence, the outskirts appeared. Although there were new barrier walls in construction, their completion required vast amounts of funding, human resources, and even more time. The colossal, skeletal frames of the barriers had loomed above the outskirts for as long as Sonny could remember, unfinished. With what he knew now, he doubted that they would ever be completed at all. In any case, whole generations of people like him had already lived and died outside their protection. The air in the outskirts might not have been as bad as in the desolate wilderness beyond, but it was far from safe. Those who breathed it every day did not tend to enjoy good health or long lives. It reeked. Breathing in the familiar stench, Sonny struggled not to follow Neff's example and grimace. He had been accustomed to the smell for most of his life and never paid it much attention, but just a few years of sweet life in the dream realm and in the better parts of the city made it seem rather intense. What's the big deal? It's not that bad in winter, anyway. Just like the air, all other facets of life in the outskirts were barely suited for human life as well. The buildings were straining to keep themselves together, clean water was scarce, most food came in the form of synth-paste rations provided by the government. Everything was dirty, worn out, and on the verge of collapse. The infrastructure barely functioned. Theoretically, there was supposed to be a working transportation system with connections to the rest of the city, but in practice, it broke down and malfunctioned so often that getting anywhere with its help was hard. That was the reason why Sonny and Nephis were currently on foot. He did not regret this turn of events, however, because that gave them the chance to get a good look at people who lived in the outskirts. Just like the slums themselves, the inhabitants looked decrepit. They were all frail, thin, and with unhealthy skin. The most striking difference was their height. People who lived in the outskirts were much shorter than those who lived in the inner city, mostly due to malnourishment and sickness. In short, they all looked similar to how Sunny had been before the first nightmare. Looking at them now, he couldn't help but think of his past. Only 3 years and a few months ago, he had left this place, thinking that he would never return. But Sunny was already a very different person. He saw the familiar sights differently too. This is so strange. Sunny had always thought of himself as someone from the outskirts, but now, after traveling through several regions of the dream realm and building a life for himself in the city, Sunny suddenly understood that the outskirts were not a monolithic place. They were actually vast and encompassed numerous different areas. He had only ever known and explored a small part of them. The only world he had known for most of his life was even smaller than he had thought. How could it not be so? Sunny had never considered such things, but after his last conversation with Master Jet, he realized the true scope of it all. From what she had told him, there were somewhere between 60 and 70 million people living in the outskirts. 20% of the total population of the city existed in these unpleasant conditions, barely surviving as they were slowly ground to dust. If the mass evacuation from Antarctica succeeded, that number was going to grow even further. The outskirts were much greater than Sunny had ever thought. More than that, every city that remained on Earth had its own version of them, even if the excess population of NQSC was by far the largest. Thinking about all the struggle, misery, and desperate hope that surrounded him, Sunny sighed. People were people. Even in this pit, they found ways to adapt and find moments of happiness. They never lost their motivation to live and seek purpose. It's just that those moments were rare, and their lives were usually on the shorter side. His family had not been unhappy until it was destroyed. People more lucky than him could have a semblance of a decent life even in the outskirts, although their chances were slim. Nephi's grew silent, observing the inhabitants of the outskirts with her usual distant expression. However, there was a hint of emotion hiding deep in her eyes. After a while, she turned to Sunny and asked, "Are we here to just walk around?" He looked forward, then shook his head. "No, we came here for a reason." Soon, the narrow street they were walking on made way for a small lot. Spaces like these were not rare in the outskirts, since no one really bothered with city planning here. The mess of streets and alleys grew chaotically, with many of them being nothing but an accidental result of tall buildings, factories, and massive human hives being constructed in close proximity to each other. As a result, there were plenty of random gaps like this one around. What made the empty lot special, however, was that it had somehow turned into a small park. Greenery was exceedingly rare in the outskirts, which made the park especially precious. The modest space in front of them was currently covered by dirty snow, but come spring, patches of real grass were going to appear from beneath it. There were a few bushes, a frozen pond, and a lonely tree that somehow clung to life despite all reason. Currently, it stood bare and dark, devoid of the bright crown of its leaves. The park was surrounded by tall buildings, making it seem as if it was situated on the bottom of a deep well. Sparse sunlight fell on the tree from far above, illuminating its thin branches and the gray snowflakes that swirled in the air around them. There were several clean pathways through the snow, as well as a few damaged and vandalized benches here and there. Several people were sitting on the benches, enjoying a quiet moment of respite. They gave the young woman dressed in white and the young man dressed in black uneasy looks. Nephi studied the park for a few moments, then glanced at Sunny. "Aren't you wary that something can happen?" He took a look at her, then at himself. Both were obviously out of place, considering their physical appearance and expensive clothes. Everything about them screamed of wealth, status, and citizenship. Sunny doubted that the inhabitants of the outskirts would recognize them as ascended, but they would inevitably come to the conclusion that the strangers were rich. He shrugged. What can happen? Even if some idiots decide to try and rob us, the worst they can do is shoot at us with cheap firearms. I doubt that their bullets can bruise our skin, let alone penetrate it. One would have to use a heavy assault vehicle with state-of-the-art magnetic cannon, or better yet a Spelltech armament, to leave a small scratch on the body of a master. Even then, landing a shot would not be easy. Nephi shook her head. I'm not worried about us. I'm worried about the idiots. Sunny smiled. Well, don't be. If there is one thing we outskirt rats are good at, it's self-preservation. Anyone can see that both of us are killers. They'll stay away. Changing Star gave him a hesitant nod. A few moments later, she asked, So what is the reason? He lingered for a moment, then shrugged. I met your mother already, so I thought I would bring you to meet mine. Nephi's raised an eyebrow. I thought your mother was dead. Sunny nodded. She is come. He headed toward the tree, knowing that Neph would follow. As they approached, Sunny sighed and said in a neutral tone, Most people in the outskirts don't get to have a burial, so there are no graves either. Space is a precious commodity. Energy and fuel are too. Human remains are usually dissolved and then discarded. Still, it is nice to have a special place to remember them by. This tree is such a place for me. A long time ago, I carved 2 lines into it, one for my mom and one for my dad. He stopped and stared at the tree, a distant expression appearing on his face. In truth, Sunny had been thinking about his mother a lot recently, and that prompted him to visit the small park. Taking Nephi's along was just an afterthought. He had decided that showing her the hidden side of the city would do her some good. It could give her perspective, at least. As they stood silently under the tree, Nephi studied it for a while, and then suddenly said, There are 3 lines. Sunny looked at her in confusion. What? Neph pointed to the bottom of the trunk. There is a 3rd line. He stared at her for a moment, then turned away. Oh, the 3rd line is for me. I added it before going away to face the first nightmare. Changing Star glanced at him, then asked in her usual even tone, Were you not confident of conquering it? Sunny laughed. Gods no, I was pretty sure that I would die. I was ready to, actually. Back then, I was sort of ambivalent about life, I guess. Very few people from the outskirts survive their nightmares. We are physically weak and less educated than proper citizens. Local schools are not exactly known for training skilled fighters. He remained silent for a moment and then added, It's weird, actually. A large part of why I survived the first nightmare was exactly because I did not really care to survive. Since I already accepted that I would die, I did not worry too much about anything. No matter what happened, I was able to calmly react instead of panicking. I acted with unrestrained coldness and calculation. Sunny sighed. Of course, such an attitude is of limited utility. It helped me at the start, but one can't get far by acting like a walking corpse. It was only halfway through the nightmare that I suddenly decided that I wanted to live. And once I did, I really, really wanted to live. That was what pushed me to go on despite all reason and eventually escape. He looked at the lonely tree, lingered, and said, I haven't been back here since. When I was carving the 3rd line for myself, I had no idea that I would return one day as a master, let alone one with the special strategic asset designation and enough value to make both the government and the great clans fight over me. Sunny shook his head and grinned. What a strange turn of events, huh? They stood silently under the tree for a while. Eventually, Nephi's looked at him and said evenly, You did well. Sunny glanced at her with a pale smile, then nodded. I guess I did, didn't I? My mom would have been very happy. If she was alive, that is. I am healthy, well-fed, and have a house in a good part of the city. I even found a student. These things might not sound like much to you, but to her, they would have been like a dream. He turned to the tree, and added after a short pause, "I don't really remember my dad too well because I was too little when he passed away. But my mom, I remember her perfectly. She was like a ray of sunshine. The strangest thing, though, is that when I was a kid, she was the whole world to me. I thought that she knew everything, could do anything. But now I realize that she was barely older than we are. She was more or less a kid herself." Nephi's looked at him and said, "But we aren't kids." Sonny tilted his head, then shrugged. "That is true, I guess. We are adults, which is a strange thought. I don't really feel very different from how I was before, at least not in terms of being confident and knowing what the hell I am doing." Changing Star sighed, then shook her head a little. "That is because you have been an adult for a long time. People like us have to grow up early." Sonny thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. I have a suspicion that when I look back on today in a decade or so, I will be dismayed by how big of an idiot I was." Nephi smiled with the corner of her mouth. "That has nothing to do with adulthood." He spared her a short glance and scoffed. "That was the point where you were supposed to say that I am not an idiot, you know." She stared at him with a deadpan expression, then said in her usual tone, "I know." Sonny couldn't help but laugh. "Anyway, I don't really understand why I wanted to come here. I guess I expected to feel something, and I do. It's just not what I thought I would feel." Nephi's lingered for a few moments. Eventually, she said with a hint of hesitation in her voice, "Do you maybe want to say something to your mother?" Sonny lingered for a while, then shook his head. "What is the point? She is dead, and the dead can't hear anything. They are simply gone. They only exist in the memories of the past. I would rather concentrate on the future." Despite the fact that he had achieved many things that his mother would have wanted for him, it had not been without a cost. His house, his wealth, and the fridge full of food he had back home were only one side of his life. The other side was full of dire things like the sovereigns, the obel scale, and Nephi's. His bond with her was a dire thing, too. His future was not cloudless at all. The past few weeks had been some of the calmest and most enjoyable in Sonny's life. He had mostly been in Neff's company, doing nothing but training and spending time with her. He had hidden his head in the sand and refused to think about all the troubles that loomed on the horizon. That pleasant time was coming to an end. In a few days, Nephi's was going to finally leave to face the Firekeepers. About a week after that, they were going to accept Clan Valor's invitation and attend their ball. After that, everything was going to change. Their futures were going to be decided on that day. Sonny found himself standing at a crossroad, not knowing where any of the roads actually led. Even worse, he was not the only one making the decision on what turn to take. All of it was so tiresome. He sighed, then walked over to the tree and touched it for a brief moment. "Hey, Mom, it's me. I am doing well, I guess. Rain is well, too. She looks like you very much. You would have been really proud of her." Sonny felt rather stupid at that moment, but at the same time, strangely soothed. He hesitated for a few seconds and then thought, "Anyway, I don't think I will be able to visit again for a long time. Not that you're really here. Oh, that young woman right there is Nephi's. She is well, it's complicated. In any case, I think you would have liked her. I have several other friends, too. So I am in good hands. You don't have to worry about me." With that, he stepped back, looked at the lonely tree one last time and turned away. "Let's go." As they walked away, Neff looked at him and asked tentatively, "Are you all right?" Sonny smiled crookedly and shrugged. "Of course, why wouldn't I be?" She opened her mouth to say something, but at that moment, several figures suddenly appeared from behind a corner, surrounding them. They were all dirty and disheveled, looking like typical outskirts thugs. The leader, a muscular man with a chemical scar on his face, pointed a kinetic handgun at them and grinned. "Not so fast, lovebirds. Rich kids like you really should think twice before coming to where you don't belong. Sonny silently palmed his face. So, why don't you give us your communicators and other valuables before something bad happens? Damn it, this is so embarrassing. Before the thug was done speaking, Sonny appeared near him, grabbed the barrel of his gun and squeezed gently, turning it into a deformed steel pancake. The muscular man stared at his weapon in shock, then suddenly let go of it and jumped back. A awakened run. The thugs all froze for a second, then paled and dashed away, disappearing as fast as they had appeared a few moments ago. Sonny was left standing with a broken gun in his hand. He sighed heavily, then threw it into a rusty trash container that stood a couple dozen meters away. The gun clanked against its edge as it disappeared inside. Unbelievable. The most disheartening thing about it all was that he knew the leader of the thugs. Growing up in this area of the outskirts, Sonny had run into this particular gang more than once, sometimes being mistreated by them, sometimes running small errands for the thugs in hopes of earning some food. And yet, none of them had recognized him, instead mistaking Sonny for a rich city kid. He looked at Nephi's and cleared his throat. Sorry about that." She shook her head. "No need to apologize." Sonny hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and continued walking away from the park. "I guess I am really not an outskirt rat anymore." A few days passed in pleasant tranquility. Eventually, however, the time ran out. Nephi's gathered her things and left for the Immortal Flame Manor, leaving Sonny alone. It was a bittersweet feeling. Sweet because he finally had the house for himself once again. Bitter because, well, Sonny was not sure that he enjoyed his home being so empty anymore. Nevertheless, he had chosen not to follow her to join the rest of the cohort yet. Sonny felt like the looming ball was going to change a lot of things, and had to prepare a few contingencies. If the worst happened, there was a big possibility that he would be gone for a very long time again. There were several things he had to do, just in case. His lecture course at the academy had just started, but at this rate, it was under threat of ending prematurely. Sonny spent some time imparting his students with the best and most essential knowledge he could relay in such a short amount of time, but other than that, there was not much else he could do to prevent his academic reputation from potentially receiving a hit. Luckily, all masters led hectic lives. The administration was long accustomed to their star lecturers disappearing for months on end without much of a warning, so his case was not unique. His second worry was the brilliant Emporium. The memory store was already in a difficult position because of the invisible blockade that had prevented Sonny from visiting the dream realm and hunting down nightmare creatures for half a year. Their inventory was running low. In the past 6 months, Sonny had slowly shifted his business in the direction of selling memory versions of mundane items that he weaved. That was not a straightforward endeavor, however. Sure, the idea of having a toothbrush memory sounded pleasant, but he had to use a soul shard to create one. Considering how expensive soul shards were in the real world, the price of a simple toothbrush would have been simply unreasonable. So, after thinking for a while, Sonny had come up with a strategy of shifting his focus from necessities and toiletries to luxury items. That way, he could price them high enough to earn more than the price of a soul shard. Rich clients already had access to mundane items in the dream realm due to their connections to masters and saints, but were willing to pay a lot for the convenience of having various luxuries readily at hand. So, Sonny spent a few days painstakingly creating an especially large batch of these extravagant memories, and then met with Aiko to transfer them. After thinking for a while, he gave her a strange set of instructions. Sonny wanted the brilliant Emporium to stock up on as many memories that provided either warmth or resistance against cold as possible. The second priority went to memories that could serve as a source of light, which were usually cheap and plentiful. He also told Aiko to sell every soul shard they had left. The reason behind this decision was simple: the approaching disaster in Antarctica. Once the government announced the voluntary mobilization, a lot of people were going to need to equip themselves for the harsh realities of polar night. The large amount of opening gates would also flood the market with soul shards, probably crashing their price to a certain extent. In any case, he hoped that the brilliant Emporium would survive for a while thanks to these measures, should something happen at the ball. Lastly, there was Rain. His sister was going to turn 16 in a few months, which meant that Sunny had very little time left to prepare her for the potential first nightmare. On the other hand, there were not a lot of things left that he could teach her. Of course, Rain still had a lot of room to improve, but at that stage, Sunny's presence was only of marginal use. What she really needed to do was to truly internalize and assimilate the skills and knowledge that he had already imparted to her. While Sunny could help his sister along, most of the work had to be done by Rain herself. Still, he used the week before the ball to the fullest extent. The teenage girl might have been sour about how intense their lessons suddenly became, but it was for her own good. She was already better prepared to face the nightmare than he had been by far. Whether or not that would be enough, he did not know. Other than these three things, there was not a lot for Sunny to do. He prepared his home to go into conservation mode in case he did not return from the ball. He restocked the covetous coffer with various supplies for a long expedition. He fought against Saint to clean the rust off his battle instincts. He tinkered with his memories for a bit, trying to improve them. All of these preparations might have been for nothing, but Sunny was more willing to be wrong than to be unprepared. Finally, the fateful day came. Wincing at the thought of how much money he had spent on that thing, Sunny donned a stylish black suit and briefly looked at himself in the mirror. The bespoke attire had been made by a luxury establishment that serviced many prominent legacies and incorporated the most rare and durable materials, many of them coming from the dream realm. The suit was made in the style that many awakened preferred, existing somewhere between the modern fashion and the more antiquated aesthetic that memories adhered to. It was elegant and fitting, including a stylish half-cape and tall leather boots. Even though Sunny had said a few strong words to Kai during the fittings, now that he looked at himself, he could not deny that he looked rather good. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then sighed. "Let's face the music, I guess." With that, he briefly circulated essence through the coils of Soul's serpent, wrapped 3 of the 4 shadows around his body, and walked outside. His carriage, in the form of a luxury PTV, was already waiting. 5 of them sat inside the sleek PTV, watching as the streets of the city flew by. Sunny was not the only one who had donned an extravagant suit. Kai was wearing an even more stylish attire, radiating so much grace and elegance that the interior of the moving vehicle seemed almost electrified. Cassie had chosen a simple but flattering gown of soft colors. Her bracelets and jewelry were picked to match the silver half-mask that she wore like a crown. The familiar blue-green cloak was draped around her shoulders. She was holding the quiet dancer by the scabbard, as if it was a cane. Effie wore a white tunic with tasteful gold accents. There was a golden laurel resting on her head, with similar bracelets and anklets accentuating its sheen. With her olive skin and toned physique, she looked like an ancient goddess. The huntress seemed to be enjoying herself as she sipped champagne from a tall glass. Nephise chose to wear a more practical attire, which was nevertheless equally splendid. Her nightly suit consisted of black trousers, a black doublet with silver embroidery, and a pristine white cape. The simple band of the crown of dawn accentuated the steely gray of her striking eyes. Her hands, clad in white gloves, rested calmly on her knees. All of Sunny's worries about how pompous he looked in his expensive suit disappeared. Compared to the others, he looked almost underdressed. Was there really any time to worry about appearances, anyway? Looking at the members of the cohort, he hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Are you ready?" Nephi's glanced at him, then turned back to the window. "It's just a ball." He stared at her for a moment, then grinned. Then he laughed. "Oh, indeed, indeed." Soon, the PTV left public streets and entered the road that led to the stronghold of the Valor clan. Although their main seat of power was situated in the Dream Realm, safely protected by the great walls of the legendary Bastion, the family obviously maintained several prominent properties in the waking world. This one resembled a hybrid between an embassy and a sprawling fortress. The complex took enough area in the center of the city to be considered a separate district and encompassed a multitude of buildings, most of them just a few stories high. More floors, of course, were situated underground, where the bulk of activity took place. The purpose of the buildings ranged from serving as residences for the members of the clan and retainers to training centers for the household troops, research facilities dedicated to various applications of spelltech, and everything in between. Just like Nephi's had said, a legacy clan was not just a handful of people united by a bloodline. It was a large organization that, in the case of Clan Valor, included thousands upon thousands of people from all walks of life. The fortress also housed vaults where the sleeping pods of those awakened who either belonged to or served the great clan were located, so security measures were nothing short of exaggerated. Sonny himself could see and feel plenty of sentries, both mundane and possessing greater powers. Judging by a slight frown that appeared on Kai's face, there were plenty more that he had failed to notice. The complex was fully prepared to face any kind of attack, be it a manifestation of a nightmare gate or a sudden assault perpetrated by the forces of rival clans. On one hand, that made Sonny feel safe. On the other hand, escaping this stronghold would not be easy. "Let's hope I won't need to." Other than that, the aesthetics of the complex were very pleasing to the eye. There were plenty of trees and grass around, with architecture that did a great job of hiding the utilitarian and militaristic design of the sprawling fortress. In fact, if Sonny did not know any better, he would have thought that he was in the middle of a blissful garden district that was meant for people to relax in peace and tranquility. Living here must have been very nice. Chances were, he would have an opportunity to experience that life rather soon. Yeah, as if that would happen. Sonny glanced at Nephi's and then turned away, his face darkening. A few minutes later, their PTV approached the center of the complex, where a grand structure stood, illuminated by bright spotlights. He felt a bit of awe when he noticed that it was built of stone blocks similar to those that Bastion itself consisted of. This hinted at the fact that the stones were brought to the waking world from the dream realm. Considering that only powerful masters and saints could transport matter between two worlds, the cost of the Great Hall was nothing short of astronomical. He could hardly imagine a more impressive and effective proclamation of wealth and power. The great clans really knew how to set the stage. The walls of the hall were decorated by vermilion banners that stretched from its roof to the very ground, each bearing the image of an anvil pierced by a sword. A red carpet led from the grand stairs to the road, where a row of similarly luxurious PTVs were parked, slowly moving as their distinguished passengers disembarked. Neat rows of uniformed honor guards stood at the sides of the red carpet, forming a living corridor through which the guests had to walk before they reached the entrance. Everything about them screamed of discipline and power. These soldiers alone were enough to protect people invited to the ball from most dangers. Not that the guests needed any protection. Although there were a few high-ranking mundane humans among them, most were either promising awakened or masters. There were even saints here, which made Sonny feel rather uncomfortable. If there was one group of people in the city he really wouldn't want to provoke, it was those attending the ball. Sonny felt like a little fish being thrown in a tank full of hungry sharks. He could probably fight off or at least escape from any one of these sharks, but all of them together. Still, I'm not without sharp teeth myself. Finally, their PTV reached the vermilion carpet. Sunny waited for the door to open, then sighed and stepped outside. Nephi's walked forward with her usual impassive confidence. It was as though the magnificence of the towering hall, the rows of armor-clad honor guards, and the distinguished guests surrounding them did not deserve her attention, let alone apprehension. Her face was still and inscrutable, and her eyes were cold and focused. As the rest of the cohort followed behind her, Sunny couldn't help but feel uneasy. Right now, he was especially frustrated at his lacking ability to read her moods. He just hoped that Changing Star was not going to try and assassinate the members of the Valor clan as soon as she saw them. No way she wouldn't, right? Their arrival caused a bit of a stir. Many eyes were suddenly directed at the 4 members of the cohort, but it was nothing compared to how many people were staring at Nephi's, either openly or in secret. She did not pay them any attention, so Sunny looked straight ahead and pretended to not care either. Of course, he was tensely studying everything and everyone around them through his shadow. Somehow, he felt as if he had returned to the Red Colosseum. Sunny almost expected the people surrounding them to start chanting "Glory" at any second. Of course, that did not happen. The cohort walked up the stairs and entered the grand hall, where they were led to massive doors that were carved of familiar wood. As the doors opened into a vast chamber full of exquisitely dressed people, a loud voice announced, "Lady Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan, Ascended Song of the Fallen, Ascended Raised by Wolves, Ascended Nightingale, Ascended Sunless." For a moment, every conversation in the hall paused. Everyone turned to look at the new arrivals. Sunny frowned. The amount of pressure that crashed into him was enough to make a mundane person kneel. It was not that the guests were consciously exerting it, just the side effect of so many powerful people being gathered in one place. Just at first glance, he identified nearly 100 masters and a handful of saints in the crowd, with each of the latter basically glowing like a beacon of power in the sea of people, surrounded by a small island of empty space. A very large chunk of humanity's defensive capabilities were gathered in this hall. If Sunny was pressured, then Nephi's must have felt as if a mountain landed on her. And yet, she did not bat an eye. A wave of whispers rose, barely audible in the harmonious hum of relaxing music. "It's her. What Changing Star is here? Look, it's the heiress of Immortal Flame." Even among the absolute elites, Neph's status was immense enough to create a commotion. The other 4 members got a lot of attention, too, as the brightest stars of the younger generation of Awakened. Both their SS designations and the rapid speed of their ascension made them noteworthy people. Subjected to hundreds of gazes, Nephi's nodded curtly and walked toward the tables that offered drinks and refreshments. As she did, the arrival of another guest was announced, causing the excitement of the crowd to subside a little. Sunny felt incredibly awkward. "So, what do we do now?" Kai simply smiled. "We don't have to do anything, really, before the host arrives and commences the ball. Usually we would use this time to walk around and socialize, but in this case, there is no need. Everyone will come to us. So, just enjoy yourself, smile, and answer politely if someone addresses you." Sunny shifted his shoulders. That is terrible advice. How was he supposed to enjoy himself and smile, knowing what was at stake? As for being polite, politeness often required a person to lie. What was he supposed to do if someone asked him a question that demanded a rude answer? Luckily, he had nothing to fear. Very soon, a stream of people started to approach them, somehow making it seem as if they all just happened to walk by. However, all their attention was concentrated on Nephi's. Barely anyone spared a moment to chat with the other members of the cohort, and even then, Sunny was the last in line. which suited him fine. Lady Changing Star, it is an honor to meet you. You made us all proud, young lady. I was actually friends with your grandfather. I once fought a battle side by side with your parents. The memory of their valiance was forever etched into my heart. Everyone wanted to, if not become friends, then to at least establish a connection with the daughter of the hallowed clan that seemed to be rising from the ashes. Nephise remained calm, conversing with the great and powerful people that approached her in a neutral but slightly stifled tone. Sunny could feel the flames burning in her soul growing hotter and hotter, however. She was filled with masterfully suppressed rage. Well, he would be too. All these well-wishers could not wait to share the tales of how highly they valued and admired her parents and grandfather. And yet, they had been perfectly fine to do nothing when the immortal Flame clan needed help. None of them had raised a hand to help Nephise when she was young, weak, and being hunted by the assassins of the hidden rulers of the awakened society. It was only now that she had become ascended, and an absolutely outstanding one at that they remembered past friendships and tried to ingratiate themselves to her. Their smiles and pretty words were worthless. Their friendship was worthless. This was all just a big charade. Sunny observed the elites with a bit of bewilderment. Were they all such shameless liars, or did they actually believe their own lies? In any case, this feast of deceit was nothing short of delectable, if only it was not so amateurish. After a while, he suddenly felt a cold shiver running down his spine. Turning his head slightly, Sunny noticed a familiar face. An exquisitely beautiful woman in a dazzling dress the color of red wine was approaching them. She was graceful and elegant, with a supple figure and full, scarlet lips. Her most striking feature, however, was her skin. It was gray like stormy clouds, smooth like silk, and devoid of any imperfections. The woman smiled, revealing perfectly even pearly teeth. Lady Nephise, I am so glad to see you again. Changing Star looked at her and lingered for a moment. Then she said, Sation, I am glad to see you as well. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.